7-year-old Zara Washington clutches her teddy bear as a white flight attendant demands she move from first class. When Zara's mother whispers their last name, the entire crew goes pale. Nobody realized they just tried to displace the granddaughter of America's newest Supreme Court justice. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button and subscribe if you've ever witnessed discrimination in public spaces. Get ready for a powerful journey about standing up against injustice in the most unexpected places. Zara Washington checked her watch for the third time in 5 minutes. The security line at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport moved at a glacial pace, but she was determined to maintain her composure. This vacation had been planned for months, and nothing would spoil it, not even TSA's seemingly deliberate slowness when checking her documents. "Mommy, are we still going to make it?" 7-year-old Zara asked, clutching her well-loved teddy bear, Justice. The bear, named after her grandfather's profession, wore a tiny black robe Zara had custom-made. "Of course, sweetheart. We have plenty of time," Zara reassured her daughter, though her frequent glances at her watch suggested otherwise. After 3 years of postponed plans due to the pandemic and her relentless work schedule, Zara had promised Zara a magical trip to Disney World, complete with first-class plane tickets, a special splurge she'd saved for by taking on extra cases. As a prominent civil rights attorney, Zara's life was consumed by landmark cases and late nights poring over legal precedents while Zara slept. Single motherhood alongside a high-pressure career meant constant sacrifice, but seeing Zara's eyes light up when she announced their trip made every late night worth it. When they finally cleared security, Zara guided Zara toward the premium lounge. The attendant at the entrance scrutinized their boarding passes longer than necessary. "These are first-class tickets," Zara stated, keeping her voice level. "Yes, I can see that," the attendant replied with thinly veiled surprise. "Right this way." Inside the lounge, Zara noticed the subtle shifts in body language as they entered, the quick glances, the whispers behind hands, the slight repositioning of personal items on empty adjacent seats. These were microaggressions she recognized all too well, having documented hundreds of them in discrimination cases throughout her career. Zara seemed oblivious, focused instead on the complimentary cookies and juice. Zara didn't correct her when she took 2 cookies instead of 1. Today was about joy, not teaching moments about the unfairness of the world. Those lessons came often enough without seeking them out. "Mommy, is first class really going to have the big chairs that turn into beds?" Zara asked, chocolate crumbs dotting her chin. "Not beds exactly, but the seats recline much more than regular ones. You'll be able to sleep comfortably," Zara explained, wiping her daughter's face with a napkin. A businessman in an expensive suit glanced over, his expression suggesting he found a child's presence in the premium lounge distasteful. Zara met his gaze unflinchingly until he looked away. When boarding was announced, Zara took Zara's hand and led her to the priority line. The gate agent smiled at Zara but gave Zara a second look when checking their boarding passes. "Enjoy your flight," she said finally, her tone suggesting surprise that the passes were indeed legitimate. Walking down the jet bridge, Zara squeezed Zara's hand. "Remember how special this is. Not many people get to experience first class." "I know, Mommy. I'm going to remember everything so I can tell Grandpa all about it." As they stepped onto the plane, the flight attendant's smile faltered slightly upon seeing them. Zara recognized the expression, surprise followed by recalibration. "Welcome aboard," the attendant said, recovering quickly. "First class is to your right." The first-class cabin was half full when they arrived. Zara helped Zara settle into the window seat, placing Justice the teddy bear carefully beside her. "Look how big these seats are," Zara exclaimed, bouncing slightly in her plush chair. "Please keep your voice down, sweetheart," Zara reminded gently, aware of the stares from other passengers. A middle-aged white woman across the aisle watched them with undisguised curiosity. An elderly man 2 rows ahead turned to look, his expression unreadable. Zara focused on helping Zara with her seatbelt, ignoring the attention they were attracting. Flight attendant Brenda Phillips approached their row, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Can I see your boarding passes, please?" Amara handed them over, having anticipated the request. This wasn't her first experience with being questioned about belonging in premium spaces. Brenda studied the passes longer than necessary. "These seats are 3A and 3B. "Yes, that's what the passes say," Amara replied evenly. "Is there a problem?" the elderly black man from 2 rows ahead asked, his deep voice carrying authority. Before Brenda could respond, another flight attendant approached, a tall man with meticulously styled hair and a name tag reading, Kyle Stevens, head flight attendant. "Is everything all right here, Brenda?" he asked, his gaze immediately focusing on Amara and Zara. "Just checking boarding passes," Brenda replied. Kyle took the passes from her hand. "Thank you, I'll handle this." He examined them with exaggerated care. "There seems to be some confusion. These seats are in our premium first-class section." "Yes, I'm aware," Amara said, her patience wearing thin. "Those are our assigned seats, as shown on the boarding passes you're holding." Kyle's expression hardened. "Ma'am, there must be some mistake. Perhaps you were accidentally upgraded in the system. The proper protocol would be for your daughter to be seated in economy class. Children under 12 typically aren't seated in first class unless traveling with premium status members. That's not airline policy," Amara stated firmly. "I purchased these tickets specifically, and there's no age restriction for first class on your airline. I checked before booking." Kyle's smile tightened. "Nevertheless, I'm going to have to ask your daughter to move to a seat in economy. We can have a flight attendant supervise her." Zara's eyes widened with confusion and hurt. She clutched just as tighter against her chest. "Absolutely not," Amara said, her voice low but firm. "My daughter stays with me. We paid for these seats, and we will be occupying them. Ma'am, I'm trying to ensure all our passengers have the experience they paid for. First class is designed as a quiet, premium environment, and, are you suggesting my daughter is incapable of behaving appropriately?" Amara interrupted, keeping her voice measured despite her rising anger. Kyle's expression made it clear that was exactly what he was suggesting. "I'm simply trying to ensure everyone has the flight experience they expect. The experience I expect is to receive the service I paid for without harassment," Amara replied. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding," Kyle said, his tone condescending. "Let me be clear, your daughter needs to move to economy class where she belongs. Now." Amara felt a familiar heat rising in her chest, the same sensation she experienced in courtrooms when facing particularly egregious injustice. She took a deep breath, centering herself. Years of legal training had taught her to remain composed when others lost control. "No," she stated firmly, looking Kyle directly in the eyes. "My daughter and I will remain in our assigned seats, which we legally purchased. Your request has no basis in airline policy." Kyle's face flushed. "Ma'am, I've been working this route for 15 years. I know the policies better than anyone, and I'm telling you children belong in economy unless they're flying with premium status members." "Then perhaps you could point out that specific policy in writing," Amara challenged, her voice steady. "Because I reviewed your airline's policies thoroughly before purchasing these tickets, and no such restriction exists." Several first-class passengers were now openly watching the confrontation. Some appeared uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and avoiding eye contact. Others seemed almost pleased by the spectacle, their expressions suggesting they agreed with Kyle's position. "I don't need to show you anything," Kyle snapped, his professional demeanor cracking. "As head flight attendant, I have final say on passenger seating arrangements for safety and comfort reasons." "Safety?" Amara raised an eyebrow. "Please explain how my 7-year-old daughter presents a safety risk in first class but not in economy." Zara tugged at her mother's sleeve. "Mommy, did I do something wrong?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "No, baby, you didn't do anything wrong," Amara assured her, placing a protective arm around her shoulders. The elderly black man who had spoken earlier rose from his seat and approached. He was tall with distinguished gray hair and wore a tailored suit that spoke of quiet wealth. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm Dr. Jackson Harris. I've flown first class with this airline for over 30 years, and there is absolutely no policy prohibiting children in these seats." Kyle's expression flickered with uncertainty before hardening again. "Sir, with all due respect, this doesn't concern you." "I believe it does," Dr. Harris replied calmly. "When I see a fellow passenger being discriminated against, it becomes everyone's concern." The word discriminated hung in the air like a thunderclap. Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. "That's a serious accusation," Kyle said, his voice low and dangerous. "One that could have consequences." "I'm well aware of the seriousness of discrimination," Dr. Harris replied evenly. "I lived through the civil rights movement and have seen enough in my 70 years to recognize it when it occurs." Kyle turned back to Amara, ignoring Dr. Harris. "Ma'am, if you and your daughter don't comply, I'll be forced to delay takeoff and call security." "On what grounds?" Amara asked, her lawyer's instincts fully engaged now. "Disruptive behavior and failure to comply with crew member instructions," Kyle replied automatically. "I'm not being disruptive. I'm calmly refusing an unlawful instruction that violates our rights as paying customers," Amara countered. "But by all means, call security. I'd welcome the opportunity to discuss this situation with them." Amara had faced down intimidation tactics before. As one of the few black female attorneys in her firm, she'd learned early to stand her ground. She'd taught Zara the same principle, to stand up for herself while also staying safe. It was a delicate balance, one that black parents across America navigated daily. "Mommy," Zara whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Everyone's looking at us." Amara's heart broke at her daughter's distress. This was supposed to be a magical trip, not another lesson in how the world treated them differently. "It's okay, baby," she whispered back. "Sometimes we have to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Kyle pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the captain. This flight won't depart until this situation is resolved." "By resolved, you mean until we submit to your discriminatory demand?" Amara asked pointedly. A murmur went through the cabin. A middle-aged white woman across the aisle leaned forward. "Just move the child. Some of us paid a premium for peace and quiet. And some of us paid a premium to sit with our families," Dr. Harris countered sharply. The cabin door opened, and the pilot emerged, his expression concerned. "What's the delay, Kyle?" "We're 15 minutes behind schedule. Captain Williams, we have passengers refusing to comply with seating arrangements," Kyle explained, gesturing toward Amara and Zara. "We're refusing to comply with discriminatory treatment," Amara corrected firmly. "We purchased these seats legally and have every right to occupy them." Captain Williams assessed the situation, his expression unreadable. "What seems to be the issue with their seating?" Kyle lowered his voice, though not enough to prevent Amara from hearing. "The child is disruptive, and several premium passengers have complained." Amara felt a surge of anger. "That's a lie. My daughter has been quiet and well-behaved. We've been seated for less than 10 minutes, during which your flight attendant has been harassing us." Zara had begun crying silently, large tears rolling down her cheeks as she clutched Justice tighter. The sight broke something in Amara. Her daughter should never have to face this humiliation. "I'm an attorney," Amara stated clearly, addressing the captain directly. "I specialize in civil rights law. What your staff is doing constitutes discrimination, and I intend to pursue this matter fully if it continues." Kyle scoffed. "Playing the race card and making threats now?" "Kyle," Captain Williams warned, looking increasingly uncomfortable. "Captain, these passengers are being disruptive and threatening legal action," Kyle pressed. "Standard protocol is to remove them from the flight." Captain Williams hesitated, clearly torn between following his head flight attendant's recommendation and the growing realization that the situation was more complex than initially presented. "I'm calling security," Kyle decided, not waiting for the captain's response. He picked up the cabin phone and requested security personnel to the aircraft. Amara remained outwardly calm, though her heart raced. She'd stood up to intimidation before, but never with Zara watching, never with her daughter's tears falling because of the cruelty of adults who should know better. Dr. Harris spoke up again. "Captain, I'm a witness to everything that's happened here. This family has done nothing wrong. They're being singled out for reasons that have nothing to do with behavior." The tension in the cabin was palpable as they waited for security to arrive. Zara's small body shook with silent sobs against Amara's side. "It's going to be okay," Amara whispered, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. The world had a way of proving her wrong when she most needed to be right. Within minutes, 2 airport security officers appeared at the aircraft door. Kyle immediately approached them, speaking in hushed tones while gesturing toward Amara and Zara. One of the officers, a stocky man with a buzz cut, made his way down the aisle to their seats. "Ma'am, I need to see some identification, please." Amara maintained her composure as she reached for her purse, her movements deliberate and measured. Every eye in the first-class cabin was fixed on their row, and she refused to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her rattled. Beside her, Zara had gone quiet, her small body tense with fear, tears still streaming down her face. "Officer, before I provide identification, I'd like to understand the reason it's being requested," Amara said, her voice steady despite the fury and hurt churning inside her. "My daughter and I have valid tickets for these seats, which the flight attendant has already verified." The security officer, whose name badge read Torres, maintained a neutral expression. "Ma'am, there's been a complaint about disruptive behavior. It's standard procedure to identify all involved parties." Dar. Harris spoke up from his seat. "Officer, I've witnessed this entire interaction. There has been no disruptive behavior from this family whatsoever." Officer Torres glanced at Dr. Harris before turning back to Amara. "Nevertheless, I need to see some ID." Amara knew her rights, but she also knew that in situations like this, Black Americans walked a tightrope between asserting those rights and avoiding escalation that could turn dangerous. With Zara beside her, safety came first. She removed her driver's license and bar association card from her wallet, handing them over. "I'm an attorney, as you can see. My daughter and I paid for these seats, and we have done nothing to warrant this treatment." Officer Torres studied her ID, his eyes lingering on her last name. His expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Washington, are you related to Justice Walter Washington by any chance?" The cabin grew quieter, if that was possible. 3 weeks ago, Walter Washington had been confirmed as the newest Supreme Court Justice after a contentious but ultimately successful nomination process. His confirmation had made headlines nationwide. "He's my father," Amara confirmed quietly. "And Zara's grandfather." Officer Torres immediately handed back her identification, his demeanor transforming completely. "I apologize for the inconvenience, Ms. Washington. There seems to have been a misunderstanding." He turned and walked briskly to the cockpit, where he spoke in hushed tones with Captain Williams. The captain's eyes widened, and he glanced toward Amara and Zara with newfound recognition. Kyle, who had been standing nearby looking satisfied that security had been called, appeared confused by the sudden change in atmosphere. "What's going on?" he demanded. Captain Williams emerged from the cockpit, straightening his uniform before approaching Amara directly. "Ms. Washington, I want to personally apologize for this unfortunate situation. Please be assured that your comfort and satisfaction are our highest priority." The transformation was jarring. Minutes earlier, they had been troublemakers disrupting the flight. Now, they were VIPs deserving of special attention. The whiplash was all too familiar to Amara, the way treatment changed when people discovered her connection to power. Kyle stepped forward, still not grasping what had happened. "Captain, regardless of who they are, we have protocols," Captain Williams cut him off with a sharp look. "Kyle, a word." He guided the flight attendant several rows away, speaking in a harsh whisper. Amara could see the exact moment Kyle realized his mistake. His face drained of color, and he shot a panicked glance in her direction. The head flight attendant who had been so confident in his authority moments ago now looked like he might be sick. "What's happening, Mommy?" Zara asked, her voice small and confused. "They realized they made a mistake," Amara explained gently, wiping away her daughter's tears. "But they made that mistake for the wrong reasons, and that's not okay." Several passengers had their phones out now, discreetly recording the unfolding scene. Amara didn't blame them, she'd want evidence too if she were witnessing such a blatant display of discrimination followed by backpedaling. A commotion at the front of the plane caught everyone's attention. A woman in a tailored suit had boarded and was rushing down the aisle toward them. Her badge identified her as Diane Rogers, customer service manager. "Ms. Washington," she said breathlessly, "I just heard about this terrible misunderstanding. Please accept our sincerest apologies." Her smile was wide but her eyes betrayed panic, the look of someone doing damage control. In the months leading up to Justice Washington's confirmation, the family had received extensive media training. Amara knew that anything she said or did right now could potentially become headline news, reflecting not just on her but on her father as well. This knowledge weighed heavily as she considered her response. "This wasn't a misunderstanding," Amara stated clearly. "This was discriminatory treatment based on race, which only changed when you discovered my family connection." "That is unacceptable." Diane's smile faltered. "Of course, and we take such allegations very seriously. I can assure you that we'll be conducting a thorough investigation." Captain Williams returned to address the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We'll be departing shortly. Please prepare for takeoff." Kyle had not returned to the first-class cabin. Instead, another flight attendant, a young black woman named Tamara according to her name tag, had taken over. "Is there anything I can get for you or your daughter before takeoff, Ms. Washington?" Tamara asked kindly. The stark contrast in treatment was not lost on Amara or the observing passengers. Dr. Harris caught her eye and gave a small, knowing nod. 3 years ago, Amara had been removed from a restaurant when she questioned a charge on her bill. 5 years before that, security had followed her through a department store as she shopped for a gala dress. In each instance, she'd had no famous last name to shield her, no power to make others scramble to correct their behavior. How many other Black Americans faced similar treatment every day without the protection her father's position now afforded her? As the plane finally began to taxi, Diane Rogers remained in the first-class cabin, hovering nearby as if afraid Amara might decide to leave. Officer Torres had disembarked, but not before apologizing again and offering his card, in case she needed anything. "Mommy," Zara whispered, still clutching Justice the teddy bear tightly, "are we in trouble?" The question broke Amara's heart. "No, baby. We did nothing wrong. Sometimes people make unfair judgments based on how we look, not who we are. Because we're Black?" Zara asked, her voice so innocent that several nearby passengers visibly winced. "Yes," Amara answered honestly. She never sugar-coated these truths for her daughter, believing it was better to understand the world as it was than to be unprepared for its cruelties. As the plane accelerated down the runway, Amara noticed several flight attendants, including Tamara, discreetly taking photos of them with their phones. By the time they reached cruising altitude, she had no doubt that news of Justice Washington's daughter and granddaughter being involved in an incident would be making its way through social media. Their magical vacation was already taking a turn she hadn't anticipated. As Zara finally began to relax, Pointing excitedly at the clouds outside her window, Amara silently prepared herself for the storm that was likely waiting for them when they landed. The remainder of the flight to Orlando proceeded with an uncomfortable mix of excessive attention and whispered conversations. Diane Rogers hadn't returned to her regular duties, instead hovering in first class and periodically checking on Amara and Zara with a smile that grew increasingly strained. "Ms. Washington, we've taken the liberty of arranging VIP treatment for you and your daughter at our Disney World Partner Resort," Diane announced, leaning over their seats. "Complimentary suite upgrade, priority access to all attractions, and a personal guide for the duration of your stay." Amara studied the woman's anxious expression. "That won't be necessary. We already have accommodations arranged." "Then perhaps a complete refund of your airfare? And vouchers for future travel?" Diane pressed, her smile never reaching her eyes. The offerings reminded Amara of similar situations in her past. Times when discrimination had been followed not by genuine accountability but by attempts to buy silence. 3 years ago, when a store security guard had followed her through an upscale boutique and roughly searched her bag in front of other customers, the manager had offered a 50% discount on her purchase. 5 years before that, when a restaurant host had seated her by the kitchen despite numerous empty tables with better views, the owner had sent over a free dessert as though sugar could sweeten the bitter taste of prejudice. In those instances, Amara hadn't possessed the leverage to demand more than token gestures. Now, with her father's position providing unprecedented influence, the airline was desperate to appease her. The irony wasn't lost on her. "What I want," Amara said deliberately, "is accountability, not perks." Diane's smile faltered. "Of course. We take these matters very seriously." "Do you?" Amara asked. "Because based on what I witnessed, your head flight attendant felt comfortable enough to discriminate against a 7-year-old child in full view of other passengers. That suggests a culture that tolerates such behavior." Dr. Harris, who had remained a quiet ally throughout the ordeal, nodded in agreement from his seat. "I've flown over 2 million miles with this airline," he added. "This isn't the first incident I've witnessed, though it is perhaps the most blatant." Diane's professional veneer cracked slightly. "Kyle has been removed from this flight. I assure you he will face appropriate consequences." "And what would those consequences have been if my last name were different?" Amara pressed. Before Diane could answer, Tamara approached with Zara's requested apple juice. As she carefully placed the drink on Zara's tray table, she whispered, "Thank you for standing up to him. He's been doing this for years." Zara sipped her juice, seemingly recovered from the earlier trauma, though Amara noticed how her daughter's eyes still darted nervously whenever a crew member approached. The damage had been done, another small piece of childhood innocence chipped away by exposure to the world's ugliness. As the flight continued, several passengers made their way past their seats, some offering supportive comments while others shot disapproving glances. The middle-aged white woman who had earlier suggested they move now avoided eye contact entirely. "Ms. Washington," Dr. Harris said, moving to the empty seat across the aisle during a lull in the cabin activity. "I wanted to properly introduce myself. Jackson Harris, retired cardiothoracic surgeon. I witnessed everything that happened and would be willing to provide a statement if needed." "Thank you, Dr. Harris," Amara replied sincerely. "I appreciate your speaking up. Too often, these incidents occur without witnesses willing to acknowledge what they've seen." Dr. Harris nodded gravely. "In my 40 years of practice, I faced similar situations countless times. Operating rooms where nurses would double-check my orders but not my white colleagues. Patients requesting different doctors when they saw my face. Administrative positions mysteriously filled by less qualified candidates who happened to be white." He sighed. "I had hoped things would be better by now, for your daughter's generation." Zara, who had been listening quietly, asked, "Why do people treat us differently just because our skin is brown?" The question hung in the air, its innocent directness cutting through the polite veneer of adult conversation. "Dar. Harris looked to Amara, acknowledging her authority as Zara's mother to address such a fundamental question. Amara chose her words carefully, aware that her response would shape her daughter's understanding of a complex reality. Some people have wrong ideas about others based on how they look. They make judgments without knowing a person's heart or mind. It's not fair, and it's not right, but understanding that it happens helps us stand up against it. Do you think what happened today was fair? Comment number 1 if you believe the flight attendant was just doing his job, or number 2 if you think Amara and Zara were treated unfairly because of their race. Don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more stories about standing up against discrimination. What do you think will happen when this story hits social media? Will the airline try to sweep it under the rug or make real changes? As the flight began its descent into Orlando, Amara noticed Tamara and other crew members frequently checking their phones, exchanging glances, and whispering. The incident had likely already begun spreading through company channels. "Mommy, will Grandpa be mad when he finds out?" Zara asked, her voice small. The question gave Amara pause. Her father had spent decades fighting for justice through the legal system, culminating in his historic Supreme Court appointment. How would he react to his granddaughter facing the very discrimination he had worked to eliminate? "He won't be mad at us," Amara assured her. "But he might be disappointed that these things still happen." As they prepared for landing, Diane approached one final time. "Ms. Washington, we've arranged for priority deplaning and a private escort through the terminal." Amara recognized the offer for what it was, an attempt to minimize public exposure and potential media attention. "That won't be necessary. We'll deplane with everyone else." Diane's smile tightened. "As you wish." When the plane finally touched down in Orlando, a sense of relief washed over Amara. The confrontation was behind them, and she was determined to salvage the vacation she had promised Zara. As the seatbelt sign turned off and passengers began retrieving their belongings, she helped Zara gather her things, including Justice the teddy bear who had been a silent witness to the day's events. That determination lasted precisely until they stepped into the terminal and Amara spotted the cluster of people with cameras and microphones waiting just beyond the security checkpoint. "Ms. Washington, can you comment on the incident aboard Flight 1382, a reporter called out as soon as they emerged. Somehow, the story had already leaked. Amara instinctively pulled Zara closer, shielding her from the cameras as best she could. What should have been the beginning of a magical mother-daughter vacation had transformed into something entirely different, a public demonstration of how privilege and power intersected with race in America, with her 7-year-old daughter caught in the crossfire. By the time Amara and Zara reached their hotel room at the Grand Floridian Resort, the incident had exploded across social media. #FirstClassWhileBlack was trending nationwide, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination in travel and hospitality. Amara's phone buzzed constantly with notifications, messages from colleagues, friends, and eventually, reporters seeking comment. She silenced it, determined to preserve whatever normalcy she could for Zara's sake. "Can we go to the Magic Kingdom today?" Zara asked, bouncing on the hotel bed with restored 7-year-old energy, the morning's trauma temporarily forgotten in the excitement of Disney World. "Of course, baby. That's what we came for," Amara replied, forcing enthusiasm into her voice despite the heaviness in her chest. She would not allow discrimination to steal her daughter's joy. As Zara changed into her princess dress, Amara's phone rang with her father's special ringtone. She stepped onto the balcony to take the call. "Amara," Justice Walter Washington's deep voice carried both warmth and concern. "I just heard about what happened on your flight." "News travels fast," Amara sighed. "We're okay, Dad. Is Zara alright? A child shouldn't have to face such ugliness." The question pierced Amara's carefully maintained composure. "She was scared, Dad. Confused. Asking why people treated us differently." Her voice cracked slightly. "I've tried to prepare her for these moments, but experiencing it is different from understanding it intellectually." There was a heavy silence before Justice Washington spoke again. I know. It's the burden we carry as black parents, knowing our children will face these moments and trying to arm them without breaking their spirits. Another pause. I thought my work, my position might somehow shield her from this. Naive of me, wasn't it? Amara thought of all the times her father had faced discrimination throughout his distinguished career, the law school professor who suggested he might be more comfortable at a historically black university, the judges who mistook him for a defendant rather than an attorney, the neighbors who called police when he was moving into his Georgetown home. Each incident had fueled his determination to create change through the legal system. Your position didn't shield us today, Dad, Amara acknowledged. But it revealed something important, how quickly treatment changes when power is recognized. Most people don't have that advantage. What do you need from me? Justice Washington asked. I can make calls, speak to the airline's board members. No, Amara interrupted firmly. I need to handle this my way. If you intervene, it becomes about who we know rather than what happened. Her father's chuckle held both pride and resignation. You always were the principled one. Like your mother. His tone grew serious again. The media will be relentless. This story fits too neatly into the current national conversation to be ignored. I know. I saw reporters at the airport already. Be careful what you say publicly. Not just for my position, but for your own legal practice and Zara's privacy. I will, Amara promised. We're going to try to enjoy our vacation despite everything. After ending the call, Amara checked her email to find the airline had already issued a statement. Jetstar Airlines is deeply committed to providing a welcoming environment for all passengers. We are investigating an incident involving a misunderstanding about seating arrangements. We take allegations of discrimination seriously and are in contact with the affected passengers. The employee in question has been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. The carefully worded corporate statement made her blood boil. Misunderstanding minimized the blatant discrimination they had experienced. Allegations suggested uncertainty about what had occurred, despite multiple witnesses. And, administrative leave likely meant Kyle was enjoying a paid vacation while the airline hoped the story would blow over. Despite Amara's determination to focus on Zara's Disney experience, their first day at the Magic Kingdom was tainted by recognition. Park guests whispered and pointed. Several approached to express support, while others took photos without permission. By mid-afternoon, Amara noticed a park employee discreetly following them, presumably assigned to manage any situations that might arise. That evening, exhausted from navigating both the park and the unwanted attention, Amara tucked Zara into bed and checked social media. What she saw stunned her. Kyle Stevens had appeared on national cable news, portraying himself as the victim of cancel culture and reverse discrimination. I was simply following company procedures regarding disruptive passengers, he insisted, his expression earnest. Now I'm being vilified because the passenger happened to be related to someone powerful. If anything, this shows the privilege certain people have in our society. The host nodded sympathetically. So you're saying you would have made the same request of any child, regardless of race? Absolutely, Kyle replied without hesitation. This had nothing to do with race and everything to do with maintaining the premium experience our first-class passengers expect. The fact that Ms. Washington immediately played the race card and leveraged her family connections speaks volumes. Amara felt physically ill watching the interview. The complete inversion of reality, portraying the perpetrator as victim and the victim as privileged aggressor, was a tactic she'd seen countless times in her legal career. She scrolled through the comments section, a mistake she immediately regretted, another entitled black woman playing the race card to get special treatment. If you can't control your kid, don't fly first class. Simple. Justice Washington should recuse himself from any cases involving airlines now. Clear conflict of interest. The vitriol was overwhelming, but there were supportive comments too. I was on that flight. The child was perfectly behaved. This was pure discrimination. Jetstar has a history of this behavior. Hashtag boycott Jetstar. Kyle Stevens has 3 previous complaints about similar treatment of minority passengers. Why is he still employed? That last comment caught Amara's attention. If there were previous complaints, that would establish a pattern of behavior that would strengthen any potential legal case. Her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. Ms. Washington, my name is Dominique Taylor. I'm a civil rights attorney specializing in transportation discrimination cases. I've been tracking Jetstar's history for years. Please call me when you have a moment. Amara saved the number but didn't respond immediately. She needed time to think, to determine the best path forward. The next morning, they attempted to enjoy Animal Kingdom, but by noon, the constant attention had become unbearable. A group of tourists had followed them through 3 different areas of the park, openly filming and commenting. When one approached Zara directly, asking how it felt to be famous for being discriminated against, Amara made the difficult decision to cut their vacation short. I'm sorry, baby, she told Zara as they packed their bags in the hotel room. We'll come back another time when things have calmed down. Zara's lower lip trembled. Is it because people are being mean again? Some people aren't respecting our privacy, Amara explained gently. And that makes it hard for us to have fun together. Because of what happened on the plane? Yes. Zara considered this, her young face serious. That man was mean to us because we're black, right? I believe so, yes. And now people won't leave us alone because Grandpa is important. Amara nodded, once again struck by her daughter's perceptiveness. That's not fair, Zara declared with 7-year-old certainty. No, it's not, Amara agreed. But we can't control how others behave. We can only control how we respond. Their return flight to Atlanta was mercifully uneventful, though Amara noticed they'd been rebooked on a different airline without her requesting the change. Jetstar was clearly attempting damage control. When they arrived home, they found reporters camped outside their townhouse in Inman Park. Amara drove past without stopping, heading instead to her parents' home in a gated community where security would prevent unwanted visitors. Her mother, Zara Washington, met them at the door with warm hugs and concerned eyes. You two have had quite an ordeal, she said, ushering them inside. Your father's in his study, Amara. He wants to speak with you when you're settled. While Catherine distracted Zara with cookies and stories, Amara found her father sitting behind his desk, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed what appeared to be case documents despite technically being on leave during his Supreme Court transition. The airline's CEO called me directly, Justice Washington said without preamble. Jeffrey Barnes offered a personal apology and assured me the incident doesn't reflect their values. Of course he did, Amara replied, sinking into the leather chair across from her father. What did you tell him? That he was calling the wrong Washington. Justice Washington removed his glasses, fixing his daughter with the penetrating gaze that had made countless witnesses squirm during his years as a federal judge. This happened to you and Zara, not me. I'm not the one owed apologies or explanations. Amara nodded, grateful for her father's understanding. Barnes has a history of donating to politicians who've opposed civil rights legislation. I looked him up. I'm aware, her father replied dryly. His company's political activities came up during my confirmation research. The hypocrisy is stunning but hardly surprising. He slid a folder across the desk. This arrived by courier an hour ago. It's addressed to you. Inside, Amara found a settlement offer from Jetstar Airlines. $500,000 in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and a release of all claims. The accompanying letter emphasized the company's desire to resolve this unfortunate misunderstanding amicably and privately. They're scared, Justice Washington observed. As they should be. Before Amara could respond, her phone rang. It was the unknown number from earlier, Dominique Taylor. This time, she decided to answer. Ms. Washington. Thank you for taking my call. I've been researching Jetstar's practices for years, and what happened to you and your daughter fits a pattern. I believe we have the basis for a class action lawsuit that could force real institutional change. As Dominique outlined the evidence she'd gathered, previous complaints, internal communications, statistical disparities in how minority passengers were treated, Amara felt a familiar fire igniting within her. This was larger than one incident on one flight. This was about systemic practices that affected countless travelers who didn't have the Washington name to shield them. When she ended the call, her father was watching her with knowing eyes. "You're going to pursue this," he said. It wasn't a question. "I have to," Amara replied. "Not just for Zara or myself, but for everyone who's faced this treatment without the resources or platform to fight back." Justice Washington nodded slowly. "It will be difficult. The media scrutiny, the public commentary, the impact on Zara. And there will be those who claim you're leveraging my position for personal gain. I know. But what lesson do I teach Zara if I accept their hush money and walk away? That justice is only for those who can afford to forego compensation. That comfort is more important than accountability." Her father smiled then, a rare full smile that transformed his usually serious face. "You sound like your mother when we met. She was organizing sit-ins while I was still believing the system could be reformed from within." He reached across the desk to squeeze her hand. "Whatever you decide, we're behind you 100%. As if on cue, Catherine appeared at the study door with Zara, who was proudly sporting a chocolate mustache from her cookie adventure. "Mommy, Grandma says we can stay here as long as we need to. Can we? Please?" Looking at her daughter's hopeful face, Amara made her decision. Jetstar Airlines had picked the wrong family to discriminate against, and they were about to learn an expensive lesson about justice. The following week brought revelations that transformed Amara's individual complaint into something much larger. Dominique Taylor proved to be a formidable ally, arriving at the Washingtons' home with 3 boxes of documents and a determination that matched Amara's own. Kyle Stevens has had 7 formal complaints filed against him in the past 5 years, Dominique explained, spreading files across the dining room table while Zara played in the garden under Catherine's watchful eye. 5 involved passengers of color being asked to move from premium seating. 2 specifically involved children. "And he's still employed?" Amara asked, incredulous. "Not only employed but promoted to head flight attendant 3 years ago," Dominique confirmed. Each complaint was handled individually, with minimal consequences. A pattern deliberately ignored. As they reviewed the documentation, a disturbing picture emerged. Jetstar Airlines had a complaint rate for minority passengers nearly 3 times higher than industry average. Internal communications showed awareness of the issue but characterized it as a perception problem rather than actual discrimination. They've been settling individual cases quietly with NDAs, Dominique explained. Small amounts, $5,000 to $10,000 typically, just enough to make problems go away without addressing the underlying issues. Amara's phone rang, Dar. Jackson Harris calling from his home in Chicago. "Ms. Washington, I've been following the news about your situation. I want you to know I'm willing to provide testimony about what I witnessed. I've flown with Jetstar for decades and seen this behavior repeatedly." His offer of support touched Amara deeply. "Thank you, Dr. Harris. Your perspective as a long-term customer would be invaluable." "It's the least I can do," he replied. "When I was building my practice in the 70s, a more established doctor stood up for me when a hospital tried to restrict my privileges. We make progress when those with some measure of power use it to correct injustices." After they ended the call, Dominique showed Amara a secured website where former Jetstar employees had begun sharing stories anonymously. Flight attendants described unwritten protocols for identifying passengers who didn't belong in premium classes. Gate agents admitted to extra scrutiny for minority passengers upgrading to first class. The evidence of systematic discrimination was becoming overwhelming. We have the basis for a class action lawsuit, Dominique stated confidently. With your permission, I'd like to file next week. Your case would be the lead, but we already have 15 other plaintiffs ready to join. The decision weighed heavily on Amara. Pursuing legal action would mean prolonged public attention, potential harassment, and subjecting Zara to continued scrutiny. Yet walking away would mean accepting that discrimination had no real consequences. That evening, as she tucked Zara into bed in one of her grandparents' guest rooms, her daughter asked a question that crystallized the choice. "Mommy, are we going to fight the mean airplane people?" Amara sat on the edge of the bed, choosing her words carefully. "I'm thinking about it. Fighting would mean talking about what happened a lot, and some people might say unkind things about us." Zara was quiet for a moment, clutching Justice the teddy bear. "But if we don't fight, who will?" she asked finally, echoing a phrase Amara had used when explaining why her work as a civil rights attorney mattered. The simple wisdom of a child cut through all the complexity. If not us, who? If not now, when? The questions that had guided civil rights advocates for generations. Amara thought back to her own childhood, watching her father take on difficult cases that sometimes made him unpopular but always aligned with his principles. He had shown her that justice required courage and often personal sacrifice. "You're right, baby," she said softly, stroking Zara's hair. "Sometimes we have to stand up, even when it's hard." The next morning, Amara called Dominique to give her approval for filing the lawsuit. Within hours of the paperwork being filed, Jetstar Airlines stock dropped nearly 7% as investors reacted to the potential financial and reputational damage. The airline's response came swiftly. CEO Jeffrey Barnes appeared on morning news programs, dismissing the lawsuit as opportunistic, and the discrimination claims as isolated misunderstandings blown out of proportion. Jetstar Airlines serves millions of diverse passengers annually with the highest standards of service, Barnes insisted, his practiced corporate smile never wavering. This lawsuit represents an attempt to leverage an unfortunate miscommunication for financial gain. The dismissive response ignited a firestorm on social media, with thousands sharing their own experiences of discrimination using #FlyingWhileBlack. Former Jetstar employees began speaking on record, confirming the allegations of systematic bias. Amara had anticipated corporate resistance but was unprepared for the personal attacks that followed. Conservative commentators questioned her motives, suggesting she was trading on her father's name and teaching her daughter to play the victim. Online trolls targeted both Amara and Zara with vicious comments and even threats. "This is why companies settle," Dominique acknowledged during a strategy session. "They know the process itself can be so painful that most people give up." "I'm not most people," Amara replied, though the strain was evident in the dark circles under her eyes and the tension in her shoulders. The pressure intensified when right-wing media began calling for Justice Washington to recuse himself from any cases involving airlines or transportation discrimination. Though he wasn't directly involved in the lawsuit, critics claimed his family's financial interest created an unacceptable conflict. "They're trying to neutralize Dad's judicial impact by linking it to our case," Amara realized. "This isn't just about Jetstar anymore. It's about diminishing his influence on the court." The stakes had grown far beyond one incident on one flight. This was now about power, race, and who had the right to seek justice in America. As the legal process moved forward, Kyle Stevens launched a public relations counteroffensive. In a tearful interview with a sympathetic host, he portrayed himself as a dedicated employee whose life had been destroyed by false accusations. "I've received death threats. I can't leave my house," he claimed, wiping away tears. 20 years of service, and now I'm labeled a racist because someone with connections didn't like being asked to follow standard procedures." The interview infuriated Amara, but Dominique advised restraint. "Let him talk. Every public statement becomes evidence we can use in court. He's digging his own grave." The pressure took an unexpected physical toll when Dr. Harris, who had become an important ally and witness, suffered a heart attack. Though doctors attributed it primarily to pre-existing conditions, the stress of harassment after his identity became public had certainly contributed. Amara visited him in the hospital, bringing a hand-drawn card from Zara. Despite his weakened condition, Dr. Harris was resolute. "Don't you dare think about settling on my account," he told her firmly from his hospital bed. "I've seen too many just causes abandoned because the fight got difficult. This matters more than my comfort." His determination reinforced Amara's resolve, but the relentless pressure was taking a toll on her family. Zara had started having nightmares about mean people on planes. Justice Washington faced increased scrutiny for every ruling, with commentators analyzing whether his decisions might be influenced by his daughter's lawsuit. When Jetstar's attorneys proposed a settlement of $2 million, the temptation to end the ordeal was powerful. Accepting would mean financial security for Zara's future and an end to the constant public attention. Amara was considering the offer when Dominique made a discovery that changed everything. Through a whistleblower, they obtained internal communications showing Jetstar's legal and PR teams discussing how to neutralize the Washington situation while maintaining current customer service protocols. "They're planning to settle with us while changing nothing about their discriminatory practices," Dominique explained, her voice tight with anger. "They've already drafted the press release claiming resolution and mutual understanding to improve their stock price." The revelation crystallized Amara's decision. This wasn't just about money or even personal vindication. It was about forcing real, lasting change in how black passengers were treated, not just by Jetstar but by the entire industry. "Tell them no," she instructed Dominique. "We're taking this to trial." The decision set the stage for a legal showdown that would test not just the evidence of discrimination but America's willingness to acknowledge and address the everyday racism that persisted despite laws and corporate policies claiming equality. As trial preparations intensified, Amara sat Zara down for an honest conversation about what lay ahead. "The trial will be difficult," she explained gently. "People will say things about us that aren't true. They might be mean. But sometimes fighting for what's right means facing people who want you to be quiet." Zara considered this with the seriousness only a 7-year-old can muster. "Like Ruby Bridges?" she asked, referencing the civil rights icon they had read about together. "Yes, baby. A little bit like that. But you have something Ruby didn't have back then, a whole community of people supporting you." As if to prove her point, a package arrived that afternoon from Dr. Harris. Inside was a tiny black robe for Justice the teddy bear, matching the one worn by Zara's grandfather, with a note that read simply, "For when Justice needs a little extra courage." The gesture brought tears to Amara's eyes. They weren't fighting alone, and that knowledge gave her strength for the battle ahead. The discovery phase of the lawsuit revealed the true nature of Jetstar's operations. Internal documents showed that the airline had implemented an unofficial, passenger profile system that flagged certain travelers for additional scrutiny. While the policy never explicitly mentioned race, the implementation disproportionately affected passengers of color. Jetstar's attorneys fought viciously to keep these documents sealed, claiming they contained proprietary customer service protocols. When the judge ordered them released, the public reaction was immediate and damning. "This isn't just about one flight attendant or one incident," Dominique explained during a press conference on the courthouse steps. "This is about systematic discrimination built into corporate policies that treat certain passengers as inherently suspicious." Jetstar's legal team, led by high-powered attorney William Prescott from the firm Prescott, Morgan & Lee, responded with aggressive tactics designed to intimidate witnesses. Former employees who had agreed to testify reported receiving threatening calls suggesting their careers in the airline industry would be over if they spoke out. "They're trying to silence anyone who can confirm the pattern," Dominique told Amara during a late-night strategy session. Classic corporate playbook. Make the cost of speaking truth so high that people stay quiet. Despite these tactics, their case continued to strengthen. Statistical analysis showed that black passengers in premium classes were 8 times more likely to be questioned about their seating or asked to show boarding passes multiple times. Asian and Latino passengers faced similar, though less frequent, scrutiny. As the lawsuit gained momentum, Jetstar's corporate PR machine shifted strategies. Rather than attacking Amara directly, they began portraying her as a privileged elite using her father's position for special treatment. The Washington family represents the very definition of privilege in America, CEO Jeffrey Barnes stated in a business magazine interview. A Supreme Court justice, a successful attorney daughter, access to media and political power. Yet they've positioned themselves as victims while our dedicated employees face harassment and threats. The attempt to reframe the narrative as elites versus working people gained traction in certain media circles. Conservative outlets ran segments questioning whether the Washingtons truly represented the average Black American experience. They're trying to divide the Black community against itself, Justice Washington observed during a family dinner. Suggesting that success somehow invalidates our experiences of racism. It's an old tactic. The exceptional Negro argument repackaged for modern consumption. The pressure extended to Justice Washington's professional life. Several senators called for his recusal from cases involving discrimination claims, arguing that his family's lawsuit created an appearance of bias. Though these demands had no legal basis, they contributed to the mounting stress on the family. The most disturbing development came when Zara's school reported a security concern. A man had been seen photographing children during recess, focusing particularly on Zara. Though he fled before security could apprehend him, the incident necessitated hiring private protection for the 7-year-old. This has gone too far, Catherine Washington declared after hearing about the school incident. Is a lawsuit worth putting my granddaughter at risk? The question haunted Amara that night as she watched Zara sleep, Justice the teddy bear clutched tightly in her arms. Was the principal worth the price they were paying? The settlement offer still stood, $2 million and a public apology. They could end this, ensure Zara's safety, and still claim a kind of victory. Amara was seriously considering the settlement when a new development shifted the landscape again. A current Jetstar flight attendant named Monica Wilson contacted Dominique with explosive information. They train us to watch for passengers who might make others uncomfortable, Monica revealed during a confidential meeting. The examples they showed during training are almost exclusively people of color. They call it maintaining cabin atmosphere, but we all know what it really means. Monica provided training materials and recordings that confirmed the discriminatory nature of Jetstar's practices. More importantly, she revealed that similar protocols existed at other major airlines. This wasn't just one company's problem but an industry-wide practice. I could lose my career for this, Monica acknowledged, her hands trembling as she handed over the evidence. But I can't stay silent anymore. Every shift, I'm expected to participate in discrimination, and it's eating away at my soul. Her courage reinforced Amara's determination to see the case through, despite the personal costs. This wasn't just about one incident on one flight anymore. It was about challenging systematic discrimination that affected thousands of travelers daily. The discovery process also unearthed troubling connections between Jetstar and political figures who had opposed civil rights legislation. CEO Jeffrey Barnes had personally donated to campaigns of politicians who had voted against expanded protections for minorities in public accommodations. The airline's corporate PAC had similarly supported candidates with poor civil rights voting records. They're not just passively participating in discrimination, Dominique observed. They're actively supporting a political agenda that enables it. As trial preparations intensified, Jetstar made one final attempt to prevent public exposure of their practices. They increased their settlement offer to $5 million, with the requirement that all evidence be sealed permanently. That's their real fear, Dominique explained. Not the money, they have insurance for that. What terrifies them is the public seeing how discrimination is systematically implemented and endorsed at the highest levels of the company. The pressure to accept was enormous. Even some of Amara's allies suggested that a substantial settlement could be used to create a foundation addressing transportation discrimination more broadly. The money could fund research, support other lawsuits, and potentially achieve more systematic change than a single verdict. The decision weighed heavily on Amara as the trial date approached. Then came the news that Dr. Harris had suffered a second heart attack, this one more serious than the first. Visiting him in the intensive care unit, Amara was struck by how frail the once vigorous man appeared. "The doctors say the stress isn't helping my recovery," Dr. Harris admitted, his voice weak. "But some burdens are worth carrying, no matter the cost." His unwavering commitment despite his failing health crystallized Amara's decision. The lawsuit had never been primarily about money, it was about forcing accountability and transparency. Accepting a settlement, no matter how large, would allow Jetstar to bury the evidence of their discriminatory practices and continue them behind closed doors. "We're going to trial," she informed Dominique that evening. No more settlement discussions. The decision set the stage for what media outlets were already calling the civil rights case of the decade. The trial would test not just the specific facts of Amara and Zara's experience but America's willingness to confront the reality of ongoing discrimination in everyday life. As Amara prepared Zara for the additional public scrutiny the trial would bring, she was surprised by her daughter's resilience. "Are you scared about the trial, baby?" she asked as they reviewed pictures of the courtroom where Zara might need to testify. Zara considered the question seriously, clutching Justice the teddy bear in his tiny black robe. "A little," she admitted. "But Grandpa says being scared is okay as long as you don't let it stop you from doing what's right." The wisdom in her daughter's words brought tears to Amara's eyes. Despite everything they'd endured, the threats, the public scrutiny, the disruption of their lives, Zara was learning perhaps the most valuable lesson of all, that justice required courage, and some principles were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. As the trial date approached, Jetstar made one desperate final move. An executive vice president contacted Justice Washington directly, bypassing the attorneys to suggest that the lawsuit could unnecessarily complicate upcoming airline regulation cases that might reach the Supreme Court. The thinly veiled threat backfired spectacularly. Justice Washington reported the contact as an improper attempt to influence a federal judge, adding an ethics investigation to Jetstar's mounting problems. "They've miscalculated at every turn," Dominique observed. "They thought your family connection was your advantage, but it's actually been theirs. They assumed you could be intimidated, bought off, or pressured because of your father's position. They never understood this was never about money or special treatment. It's about basic human dignity." The observation struck Amara as profoundly true. What had begun as a humiliating incident on an airplane had evolved into something much larger, a test case for whether America's commitment to equality extended beyond lofty rhetoric to the everyday experiences of its citizens. As she prepared her witness testimony the night before the trial, Amara felt a sense of calm purpose. Whatever the outcome, they had already forced a national conversation about the subtle discrimination that persisted despite laws and corporate policies claiming equality. That alone was a victory worth the struggle. The federal courthouse in Atlanta buzzed with activity as the trial began. News vans lined the street, and demonstrators from both sides held signs expressing support for either the Washington family or Jetstar Airlines. Security was tight, with federal marshals screening everyone entering the building. Inside courtroom 3B, Judge Elaine Carter presided with a reputation for no-nonsense efficiency and scrupulous fairness. At 58, she had 2 decades of experience on the federal bench and was respected across the political spectrum. "This courtroom is not a media circus," she warned as proceedings began. "It is a place where evidence and law determine outcomes, not public opinion or political pressure." The warning set the tone for what would be 3 weeks of intense legal battle. Jetstar's defense strategy quickly became apparent. Portray the Washington incident as an isolated misunderstanding blown out of proportion by a privileged family with a political agenda. William Prescott, Jetstar's lead attorney, presented the airline as the true victim. "What we have here is a single interaction, lasting less than 10 minutes, being used to smear the reputation of a company that serves millions of diverse passengers annually," he told the jury in his opening statement. A company where 38% of employees are people of color, including 22% of management. Dominique Taylor countered with a powerful opening that framed the case in its broader context. "This trial is not about 10 minutes on one flight," she explained. "It's about a pattern of discrimination so deeply embedded in corporate culture that it became invisible to those perpetrating it while remaining painfully visible to those experiencing it." The jury, 7 women and 5 men of diverse backgrounds, listened attentively as the case unfolded. Amara was the first witness, recounting the events on the plane with precise detail and controlled emotion. "My daughter was quiet, well-behaved, and excited about her first flight in first class," she testified. "There was no legitimate reason to ask her to move except for the assumptions made based on how we looked." Under cross-examination, Prescott attempted to portray Amara as combative and entitled. "Isn't it true that you immediately assumed racial motivation rather than considering legitimate operational concerns?" "No," Amara replied calmly. "I considered all possibilities until Kyle Stevens' behavior and comments made the motivation clear. When he said my daughter should move to economy, where she belongs, the implication was unmistakable." Dar. Harris testified via video from his hospital room, his credibility enhanced rather than diminished by his frail condition and obvious effort to participate despite his health. "In my 40 years of flying first class with Jetstar, I witnessed similar incidents at least 20 times, he testified. "Always involving passengers of color, always with the same underlying message: you don't belong here." Kyle Stevens took the stand on the trial's 5th day, his earlier media confidence replaced by visible nervousness. Under Dominique's skilled cross-examination, his testimony began to unravel. "Mr. Stevens, in your 15 years as a flight attendant, how many white children have you asked to move from first class to economy?" Dominique asked. "I don't keep track of such things," Kyle replied defensively. "That's interesting, because Jetstar does keep records of seating reassignments," Dominique countered, presenting documents from Discovery. "In your career, you've requested 63 passenger relocations from premium to economy cabins. 59 involved passengers of color. Can you explain that disparity?" Kyle's explanation about coincidence and passenger behavior grew increasingly implausible as Dominique methodically presented evidence of a clear pattern. The most damaging testimony came from Monica Wilson, the current flight attendant who had risked her career to expose Jetstar's practices. She walked the jury through the airline's training materials, including a presentation slide titled "Maintaining Premium Cabin Environment," that used almost exclusively people of color as examples of passengers who might disrupt the premium experience. "We were trained to watch for certain behaviors, certain appearances," Monica testified, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "It was never explicitly about race, but the examples and imagery made the message clear." Jetstar's attorneys objected vigorously to this characterization, but the training materials spoke for themselves. Judge Carter allowed the jury to review them directly, a significant victory for Amara's case. Aviation industry experts testified about the broader context of discrimination in air travel, presenting statistics showing that black passengers were over 3 times more likely to be downgraded, questioned about their seating, or subjected to extra document checks across multiple airlines. "This isn't just a Jetstar problem," one expert explained. "It's an industry culture that has normalized differential treatment based on racial assumptions." As the trial entered its 2nd week, Jetstar's defense strategy shifted from denial to minimization. Yes, there might have been some unconscious bias at play, they now admitted, but this reflected broader societal issues rather than corporate policy. They presented their diversity initiatives and sensitivity training programs as evidence of good faith efforts to address potential problems. The strategy might have been effective had Dominique not obtained internal emails showing these programs were implemented primarily for liability protection, rather than meaningful change. One particularly damaging email from a vice president described diversity training as the cost of doing business in today's political environment. The most difficult day came when Zara took the stand. Amara had been reluctant to have her daughter testify, but Zara had insisted, saying, I want to tell what happened in my own words. Dressed in a simple blue dress, clutching Justice the teddy bear, Zara appeared tiny in the witness chair. Judge Carter had modified protocols to make the experience less intimidating, allowing Zara to sit on a booster seat and having attorneys remain seated during questioning. "Zara, can you tell us what happened on the airplane?" Dominique asked gently. In clear, simple language, Zara described her excitement about flying first class, the flight attendant's demand that she move, and her confusion and fear when she realized she was being treated differently. "I didn't understand why he wanted me to sit away from my mommy," she explained. "I hadn't done anything wrong. I was being quiet and using my inside voice like mommy taught me." "How did it make you feel when this happened?" Dominique asked. Zara's lower lip trembled slightly. "Scared. And sad. And like I did something wrong even though I didn't." She hugged Justice tighter. "I thought maybe they didn't want black kids in the big seats." The simple honesty of her statement affected everyone in the courtroom. Even William Prescott's cross-examination was notably gentle, focusing primarily on whether Zara might have misunderstood the interaction. "Is it possible Mr. Stevens was just trying to find you a seat you might enjoy more?" he suggested. Zara considered this seriously before shaking her head. "No. He said I didn't belong there." "You can't enjoy a place when someone says you don't belong." Out of the mouths of babes, Amara thought, watching her daughter's testimony move even the most stoic jurors. The trial's most dramatic moment came when CEO Jeffrey Barnes took the stand. Impeccably dressed and media-trained, Barnes projected confidence as he described Jetstar's commitment to diversity and inclusion. Under direct examination by his own attorneys, he appeared reasonable and forthright. Then came Dominique's cross-examination. "Mr. Barnes, you've testified that Jetstar has zero tolerance for discrimination. Is that correct?" "Absolutely," Barnes confirmed. "It's contrary to our values and our business interests." "Then can you explain why Kyle Stevens, with 5 previous discrimination complaints in his file, was not only retained but promoted to head flight attendant?" Barnes hesitated. "Personnel decisions involve multiple factors, yes or no, Mr. Barnes. Were you aware of these complaints when Mr. Stevens was promoted?" "The board was briefed on certain personnel matters, again, yes or no?" "Yes," Barnes finally admitted. "But those complaints were determined to be without merit." "Without merit," Dominique repeated. "All 5 of them. All from passengers of color. All describing similar treatment. All coincidentally without merit." Barnes shifted uncomfortably. "Our internal investigation process, let's talk about that process," Dominique interrupted, presenting a series of internal memos. "These documents show your general counsel advising that settling discrimination complaints quickly and quietly was more cost-effective than thorough investigations or policy changes. Would you characterize that as taking discrimination seriously?" The questioning continued relentlessly, culminating in a damning exchange about the company's priorities. "Mr. Barnes, in the aftermath of the Washington incident, what was your primary concern?" Dominique asked. "Ensuring our commitment to equal treatment, I'm referring specifically to this email you sent to your executive team," Dominique said, displaying a document on the courtroom screens. "Where you wrote, and I quote, 'Our primary concern must be containing stock price impact and media damage rather than overreacting to a single incident.' Does that sound like a commitment to addressing discrimination?" Barnes's careful facade cracked. "Business realities require balancing multiple priorities," he snapped. "The board and shareholders expect," he stopped abruptly, realizing his mistake. In an unguarded moment, he had revealed that financial considerations outweighed addressing discrimination, exactly the point Dominique was trying to establish. As the trial neared its conclusion, Jetstar made one final settlement offer. $10 million, policy changes, and a public apology. The amount was staggering, far exceeding typical discrimination settlements. "They're panicking," Dominique observed during a conference in Judge Carter's chambers. Their own internal projections must show a jury verdict would be much higher, not to mention the stock price impact and regulatory scrutiny that would follow. Amara faced the most difficult decision of the case. $10 million would secure Zara's future and fund civil rights work for years to come. The policy changes, if implemented, could improve conditions for thousands of travelers. "I need time to consider," she told Judge Carter. That evening, as she wrestled with the decision, Dominique called with a new discovery. Through a contact at Jetstar, she had obtained a draft press release prepared for distribution immediately after a settlement announcement. It characterized the outcome as a mutual resolution that reaffirms Jetstar's existing commitment to inclusive practices. "They're planning to spin this as vindication," Dominique explained. "No actual admission of wrongdoing, no real accountability. Just a financial transaction that lets them continue business as usual." The revelation crystallized Amara's decision. This wasn't just about money, it was about forcing a company to acknowledge and address systematic discrimination. Accepting a settlement, no matter how large, would allow Jetstar to control the narrative and potentially continue their practices behind closed doors. "Tell them no," she instructed Dominique. "We're seeing this through to the verdict." The final days of trial featured closing arguments that encapsulated the case's significance beyond one family's experience. William Prescott portrayed the lawsuit as exploiting an unfortunate misunderstanding to extract money from a company that serves millions of diverse customers daily. Dominique's closing was more powerful, connecting the specific incident to America's ongoing struggle with racial equality. "This case isn't just about one flight attendant or one airline," she told the jury. "It's about whether we as a society are willing to acknowledge that discrimination doesn't always announce itself with slurs or violence. Sometimes it comes in the polite suggestion that a 7-year-old girl should move to where she belongs. And when we allow that to happen without consequence, we become complicit in maintaining the systems that treat some Americans as less deserving of dignity than others." As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, Amara felt an overwhelming sense of having done all she could. Whether they won or lost, they had forced a national conversation about the subtle discrimination that persisted despite laws and corporate policies claiming equality. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned. The courtroom fell silent as Judge Carter asked for their decision. "On the claim of racial discrimination, we find in favor of the plaintiff," the forewoman announced. "On the claim of intentional infliction of emotional distress, we find in favor of the plaintiff." Amara squeezed Zara's hand as they continued through each count, finding for the plaintiffs on all claims. When the forewoman announced the damages, $3 million in compensatory damages and an unprecedented $12 million in punitive damages, gasps echoed through the courtroom. The verdict sent shockwaves through the airline industry and corporate America more broadly. Jetstar's stock plummeted, and regulatory agencies announced investigations into their practices. Other airlines quickly began reviewing their own policies, fearful of similar lawsuits. The case wasn't quite over. Judge Carter still had to rule on the class action status, which would determine whether the verdict applied only to Amara and Zara or to thousands of other passengers who had experienced similar discrimination. In a 40-page opinion delivered a week later, Judge Carter granted class certification, writing, "The evidence presented demonstrates not isolated incidents but a pattern of systematic discrimination that affected numerous passengers. The court finds that class status is appropriate to provide remedy to all those affected and to ensure meaningful institutional change." The decision expanded Jetstar's liability exponentially and established a precedent that would influence discrimination cases for years to come. It was, as legal analysts quickly noted, a landmark victory in the ongoing fight against everyday discrimination. As Amara and Zara left the courthouse for the final time, reporters clamored for comment. Amara kept her statement brief and focused. "Today's verdict isn't just about our experience," she told the assembled media. "It's about acknowledging that discrimination takes many forms, and all of them demand accountability. No one should have to be related to a Supreme Court justice to have their dignity respected." In the aftermath of the verdict, the changes came swiftly. Jetstar Airlines CEO Jeffrey Barnes resigned within a week, citing personal reasons, though everyone understood the real cause. Kyle Stevens, who had become the public face of the discrimination case, similarly departed the company. The airline's board appointed Janet Rodriguez, a respected former federal aviation official with a strong civil rights background, as the new CEO with a mandate for comprehensive reform. Zara Washington, now recognized nationally as an advocate against transportation discrimination, established the Equal Access Foundation with a portion of the settlement funds. The foundation's mission was simple but powerful, ensuring that all travelers received equal treatment regardless of race, religion, or appearance. The courtroom victory was just the beginning, Zara explained during the foundation's launch event. Real change requires ongoing vigilance and structural transformation. Dr. Jackson Harris, having recovered sufficiently from his heart attacks to travel, became the foundation's first board member. His decades of experience as both a successful professional and a black man navigating discriminatory systems provided invaluable perspective. "I've lived long enough to see barriers fall and new ones rise in their place," he noted during the foundation's inaugural meeting. "Progress isn't linear, and it's rarely permanent without constant effort." The foundation's first initiative was developing training materials for airlines and transportation companies that addressed implicit bias in meaningful ways rather than simply checking compliance boxes. Unlike the superficial diversity programs revealed during the trial, these materials focused on concrete behavioral changes and measurable outcomes. For Justice Washington, the case had profound professional implications. Though he had maintained appropriate judicial distance from the lawsuit, his daughter's experience informed his perspective on the court. When a transportation discrimination case reached the Supreme Court in the following term, his concurring opinion emphasized the importance of recognizing discrimination in its modern forms, which rarely announces itself explicitly but operates through systems and assumptions that maintain inequality while presenting a facade of neutrality. The opinion would be cited in civil rights cases for decades to come. For Zara, the most meaningful changes were perhaps the most personal. The 7-year-old who had been told she didn't belong in first class was growing into a confident young person with a profound understanding of justice that most adults never achieved. 1 year after the verdict, Zara and Zara boarded a Jetstar flight to visit Catherine and Justice Washington in Washington, D.C. Zara had deliberately chosen the airline to see firsthand whether the promised changes had materialized. The difference was immediately apparent. The cabin crew, diverse in both race and gender, treated all passengers with equal courtesy. The flight attendant who welcomed them to first class, a young black woman named Jasmine, showed no surprise at their presence. "Is this your first flight in first class?" Jasmine asked Zara warmly. "No," Zara replied. "But it's my first one where nobody asked me to move." Jasmine's expression showed she recognized their names and understood the reference. "I'm glad to hear that. Things are different now, thanks to people like you and your mom." As they settled into their seats, Zara looked around the cabin thoughtfully. "Mommy, is everyone treated fairly now?" she asked. Zara considered the question with the honesty she always used when discussing difficult topics with her daughter. "Not everywhere, baby. We've made progress, but there's still work to be done. Some people still make judgments based on how others look rather than who they are." Zara nodded, absorbing this reality. "I want to be a pilot when I grow up," she declared after a moment. "And a judge like Grandpa. I'll fly the plane and make sure everyone follows the rules." Zara smiled at her daughter's determination. "You can be anything you want to be, baby." "I know," Zara replied with simple confidence. "That's what you fought for." The transformation extended beyond one airline or industry. The Washington case had ignited a national conversation about the subtle discrimination that persisted in everyday interactions. Other companies began reviewing their practices, recognizing that the financial and reputational costs of discrimination far outweighed the investment in meaningful change. For Zara, the most profound lesson was how power could be used to create accountability. When she and Zara had first been confronted on that flight, they had been treated as interlopers until their connection to Justice Washington was revealed. The difference in treatment had exposed the conditional nature of dignity in America, how respect could depend on perceived status rather than inherent humanity. But they had used that same power to fight for those who lacked such connections. The class action certification had ensured that the verdict benefited thousands of passengers who had experienced similar discrimination without the platform to challenge it. The Foundation's work expanded that impact further, creating systemic changes that benefited travelers who would never know Amara or Zara's names. As their plane reached cruising altitude, Zara pulled out her sketchbook and began drawing what appeared to be a courtroom filled with airplanes instead of people. "What are you drawing, baby?" Amara asked. "The Supreme Court of the Sky," Zara explained seriously. "Where planes have to follow rules about being fair to everyone." Amara watched her daughter work, adding details to her imaginary court with focused determination. In that moment, she saw the true victory of their struggle. Not just the verdict or the changes it had spawned, but the vision of justice it had nurtured in a child who now understood both the reality of discrimination and the possibility of transformation. When they landed in Washington, D.C., Zara walked through the terminal with her head held high, Justice the teddy bear tucked under her arm in his tiny black robe. She no longer clutched him fearfully as she had on that fateful first flight. Instead, she carried him proudly, a symbol of the justice they had fought for and would continue to pursue. The Washington family had turned a moment of humiliation into a movement for accountability. They had transformed their pain into progress that would benefit countless others. And most importantly, they had shown that standing up against injustice, no matter how powerful the opposition, was always a journey worth taking. The Washington family's journey teaches us powerful lessons about courage, dignity, and systemic change. First, discrimination often hides behind polite language and company policy, making it harder to confront but no less harmful. Second, accountability requires both individual bravery and structural pressure. Amara's willingness to reject settlement offers forced Jetstar to address root causes rather than symptoms. The case demonstrates how privilege operates in America. Amara and Zara were treated differently once their connection to power was revealed, highlighting how respect can be conditional rather than universal. Yet they used this leverage to benefit those without such connections, showing how privilege can be redirected toward justice. Perhaps most importantly, the story reveals how institutions change, rarely through goodwill alone, but through persistent pressure that makes discrimination more costly than reform. The transformation of Jetstar came not from moral awakening but from financial and reputational consequences that made discrimination bad business. Finally, the story illustrates how justice work shapes future generations. Zara's evolution from a frightened child to a confident young person with dreams of becoming both pilot and judge shows how standing against injustice nurtures hope rather than cynicism. By witnessing her mother's courage, she learned that dignity is worth fighting for, creating a legacy that extends far beyond a single courtroom victory. What moment in this story resonated with you most deeply? Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in public spaces? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button and subscribe to hear more powerful stories of justice and transformation. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that standing up against discrimination matters, even when it's difficult. Remember, change happens through countless small acts of courage. Your voice matters in this ongoing journey toward equality. Thank you for being part of this community that believes in dignity for all.